college, and we'll do some review, and then we'll wade forward into the second half of population ecology. So last time we were talking about how population changes through space and time. How does it go up? How does it go down? Does it stay stable? And then why? So when we talk about populations in general, they have 5 basic parameters that regulate how they go up and how they go down and what their overall population size will be. So ultimately the population size, density of any population is set by what?
Resources.
Resources ultimately set the density. However, you can go up or you can go down based on 4 parameters. What are the parameters that will grow a population? They are birth rate, which is natality,
Immigration.
and immigration, right? Coming in with an I. What decreases a population size? Death rate, which is mortality, and emigration, leaving with an E. So ultimately set by resources, and then up and down by birth, death, immigration, and emigration, and that can change through space and time. So we wanted to measure density. So density is easy, right? It's just the count per surface area, per unit area, or per unit volume. So what's the most accurate way to measure the density?
Count.
Count it all, total count. What's the problem with that? It's too labor and time intensive. So what do we use as a secondary measure?
Subsample.
We can subsample. What's the advantage of that?
Easy.
It's easier. It decreases time and labor, but we lose
Accuracy.
accuracy, and that's a problem, right? And so I gave you a method, which was the mark and recapture method for mobile organisms. You guys should be prepared to give me that back on an examination if I do a computation now. That was similar to that. And then even if sometimes that doesn't work, because the organisms are just way too mobile, there's too many of them. So what else can I use?
Indirect.
I can use indirect indicator. That's by far the easiest, time and labor wise, but it's also the what?
Least accurate.
It's the least accurate and the most sloppy, all right? So there's definitely trade-offs involved. Populations display patterns in the way that they are dispersed throughout the environment. What are the 3 basic dispersion patterns that populations show? Clump,
Uniform.
uniform, and random. What typically is responsible for clump patterns?
Resources.
Resources and behaviors. What's typically responsible for uniform?
Like territory.
Behaviors. And what's responsible for the random?
Like this.
Abiotic chance factors like current, okay, and the direction and the speed of it. All right. Does the scale have any influence on what you perceive as dispersion?
Yes.
Absolutely. And you have to be careful because we want to measure dispersion at the interaction scale of the organisms involved. But if we make a mistake, you can get the wrong idea of how it's dispersed. And if you increase or decrease the scale, the dispersion patterns will also change relative to the organism. All right, we talked about birth and death rate. So I gave you guys a couple equations there, how to simply find the birth and death rate of any population. Really, the only kind of nuance was here is you were taking the numbers who either were born or died, but it's not out of the total population, it's what?
Size of reproductive.
It's out of the size of the reproductive population if you're interested in birth, and it's the size of the what if you're interested in death.
At risk.
Population at risk, very good. So you should be prepared to do those calculations on this examination too, if confronted with it. You can do the same calculations for immigration and emigration, but I'm not going to go into that because it's just not necessary. It's redundant. We don't have the time. But they're exactly the same. So what are kind of the take-homes then in terms of spatial and temporal scales and versus the demographics of birth and death and the dispersal of immigration and emigration? Which one has a bigger effect on population dynamics at large scales? Birth and death do. Now, which has a more important effect on the the dynamics at smaller scales?
Immigration.
Immigration and emigration. Those are pretty nice generalizations. There's exceptions, but for the most part, those generalizations hold. Yes, question?
There was a pattern that population persistence was
We're going to come back to that when I talk about populations in a little more detail, but what we're going to find is that the movement in and out of subpopulations allows populations to persist through space and time, whereas if they were not connected with immigration, they can go extinct. All right, we'll talk about that in some detail. All right, so the next idea was, okay, let's go out and measure how those populations are growing over space and time, if they're getting bigger or smaller. So what's the most accurate way to do it? A direct observation. What's the problem?
It's hard.
It's hard and
Impractical.
impractical. Why?
time.
Because they live longer than we do, and that's a problem, right? Okay, so if that's the case, we can build age structures based on multiple generational observation. There are three basic types of the age structures. Number one has the shape that's flat, dropping off. Who's a good example of that?
Human.
We are. What does it mean? When you're born, you're what? You have a great chance of survival, but eventually
You die.
you will die as a major group, and you'll basically kill them from natural events. That's the way it works with a type 1. It's rare, but it happens, and for us, it's great. That means if you're born, you got a great chance of survival. All right, what's a type 2 look like?
Linear.
It's a straight linear decrease. What's a nice example in terms of organisms? Birds, okay? And what's the last one? It's the opposite of a type 1. In this case, you drop off steeply and then level out.
Plants.
Certain plants and certain fishes, typically they are, what, short-lived or long-lived? Extremely long-lived. What happens when you're born?
You die.
Your odds of survival are not very high, but once you get to a certain size and age, then what? You live a long, long time, because you're basically completely invulnerable to predation, disease, competition, whatever it might be. Once you get past that gauntlet, you're in great shape. All right. And finally, sometimes that doesn't even work. We don't have the information to create the age structure, so what's left to us? Mathematical models, which give us constructs and logical predictions into the future if we know certain attributes of how we start out with. So we talked a little bit about calculus and the benefit of a differential equation. Calculus is great for biological dynamics because it studies what? Curves. And that's what most biological dynamics sort themselves out to be, is curvilinear. So I gave you a simple population growth model. We went through this, yes?
Yeah.
Yes. And so in this model, we laid it out as the number of individuals at time t is a function of the starting number of individuals plus how many died, plus how many were born, minus how many died, plus how many immigrated, minus how many emigrated. This was a pretty simple outcome. If you have more birth and more immigration than death and emigration, what does the population do?
Increase.
It gets bigger. If birth and immigration are smaller than death and emigration, what happens? You decrease. And if they're the same, you stay the same. I think that's where we ended, yeah? Oh, no, we stopped here, yes? Okay. So remember, in this particular example, we were saying that all populations have the potential for exponential growth. Do they show that? No, and that's a good thing. But they have the potential for it, and that's really important. So remember, the take-home here was, under a set of very precise environmental considerations, you can get exponential growth. And remember, what are those? The number of new individuals added per individual per unit time is constant. The resources are unlimited in that environment. Your ability to harvest them and transfer them into reproductive output are unchecked. And this is what you'll get, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8, 16, 16, 32, on and on and on. That will lead to positive rates of exponential growth. All right, well, let's take a look at a model that can actually describe that. And so this model describes that J-shaped curve very precisely. dn over dt is equal to b minus d over n. Well, what does that mean? It's simply saying the change in the population size or density over the change in time is a function of how many are born minus how many die times the population size. The number born minus the amount that die can be thought of as R, which is the intrinsic rate of growth. If it's positive, what's your population going to do?
Grow.
It's going to grow. And if it's negative,
Decrease.
it's going to decrease. That's the take-home right there. So if I plot this with a numerical solution, that is exactly what it will plot out, is that J-shaped exponential curve. All right. So what again? If R is less than 0, population goes down. R greater than 0, it goes up. R equal to 0 stays the same. Pretty simple. So what else does it mean? R is really important here. A population with a high R versus a lower R, which one grows at a faster rate?
Higher.
The higher R does. All right, so it's going to tell us what population might grow faster than another. So the next question is, well, that's a nice mathematical construct. Theoretically, it's perfect. It works great, right? Math is perfect theoretically. Is nature perfect? Far from it. So the next question is, does it work? Does it actually do a reasonable job of modeling realistic populations in terms of their growth, stability, or decline. So let's take a look at an example. So in Kenya, you have the highest recorded growth rate for human beings on the planet at around 3%. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's an incredibly high rate of growth for a population. So here's a practice problem. You guys will log in with your iClickers, please. So what we're going to do is use this model and solve it with very small time intervals. So we're going to look at basically individual time steps. And in this class, this is just so we don't have to use calculators or anything like that. So in this class, the most time steps that I would ever ask you to solve would be no more than 3. The reason being, these take a long time to do. And you get the picture. If you solve 1 or 2, you know how to do it, right? So no more than 3 time steps will ever be asked to be solved in this class. So here's our practice problem. I have a population of 1,000 individuals, and they're experiencing a 3% increase in their population size per year. Since this is the fastest recorded we have for humans, that's considered to be the, what's R again? The per capita rate of growth, B minus D. Since this is the fastest we know, we can call it an intrinsic rate of growth, which is the maximum that we could possibly have. So in this case, R is equal to 0.03 at 3%. So this is my question for you. Assuming exponential rates of growth, how many individuals will there be at the start of year 2 if you start off with a N naught originally of 1,000 individuals? So we have a model to test that. dN over dt is a function of Rn. What does that mean again? The change of population size over the change in time is a function of the per capita rates of growth times the population size. R is easy, I just gave it to you, it's 0.03, and then the starting population is 1,000. Now here's the trick about it. To do these, it's always a 2-stage calculation. The first thing you need to do is calculate the number of new recruits to any population. That's how many were born, right, into a population, whether it's positive or negative, yes? It's either going to go up or go down stages after the descent, could be a 0. You're going to calculate that first. Then what you need to do is add that number back to the original population size to get the calculation. So remember, 2 steps to the process. So let's kind of run through it. So the first thing you need to know is how many individuals there's going to be at the start of year 1. The first thing you want to calculate is how many new recruits there are at the end of year 1. So basically, N naught to end of year 1. To make life super easy in here too, we're going to consider the kind of gestation period and birth period of any organism we talk about 1 year, right? So instead of 9 months and 18 months and all that business, 1 year, make it simple, all right? So we're going to talk about this as a 1-year cycle. So utilizing that equation, tell me how many new recruits you're going to get at the end of year 1. So get together in groups and calculate that for me, and then input your answer, please.
That's more back.
All right, that was pretty good. I'm going to stop it at 1:30. So 1:70 is going to be our sweet spot today. All right, that's great. Let's stop and let's take a peek. All right, excellent, right? It's 100%. So you're looking basically at what, 99% accuracy. So, is that the case? Yes, it is. So how do you do it? It's simply plug and play. At this point, Rn is equal to 0.3, which is R, right? 1,000, which is N, 30 individuals. Well, now you can answer the question. You had 30 new recruits, so finish it up for me. How was the whole population to start year 2? All right? We know what it was for year 1. Now give me year 2, right at the start. Whoop. Not that yet. Stop that a minute so that you answer it. Excellent. Stop it right there. Very nice. So pretty tight consensus. There's a little bit of play. So, what's the total population size? Well, that's pretty easy. What are you going to do? You simply take the 30 new recruits that you had, you add them to the original population, that was 1,000, 1,030. Now that might not sound like a lot. However, that's a crazy rate of growth. Because if I was to do this calculation over and over and over and over again, and just went iteration to iteration to iteration, now I can do this using calculus and do it like that, but I can do it stepwise as well. And if I do it stepwise, what I'll find is it takes me 25 steps. And by the time I go through 25 steps, it doubles my population size. So that means you could literally double the human population size in 25 years. What would the planet look like? Oh, it would not be pretty. There's 8 billion of us now. What do you think the planet looks like with 65? I mean, with 65. I don't want to know what it looks like with 65 billion. With, what, 16 billion in just, what, 25 years? What does that mean for resources? What does that mean for pollution? What does that mean for land mass? Think about it. Pretty crazy. So this is something we really need to be aware of, and most of the time the general population doesn't give us very much thought. So that's an incredible rate of growth. As I say 25 is 30. What's it say? 35 years. So in this model we have 25 years. For human beings on a whole, we're looking at 35-year cycle. Is that pretty insane? 35 years. It's nothing. A lot of human beings on a very limited planet. All right. Now here's the trick. Does this work in the real world? Well, I don't know. So this is the question about these mathematical constructs. They're great because they give us logical predictions. I can now predict into the future if I know what the starting population size was and what the rate of growth was per capita basis. I can tell you what the future is going to look like. The question is, does it actually work? So we need to test it. So you have to take these mathematical models and then test them in reality. So for very short time periods, this thing actually is very accurate for some organisms, all right? So for example, and you might think, oh, it probably works for microbes. That's what it works great for, and it does. For certain kinds of microbial populations, it works wonderful. But it can also model the population growth of certain large things, mammals similar to ourselves, like these seals. So this is an example of the northern elephant seal. These are big animals. You guys ever seen these if you live in like the Central Coast or around near Santa Cruz? You see them a lot. You ever been on the beaches there and seen them? They are massive animals, okay, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Pretty solid. So these things were actually hunted close to extinction. They used to be in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands. And so they were hunted for their fur and their blubber. And they were decimated by overhunting, okay? So by the 1890s, they were thought to be extinct all along the southern coast here and the central and southern coast of California, all the way down into Mexico. They were thought to be completely eliminated. And they found a little pack of them sitting on this island, Guadalupe, off of Mexico. And at that point, someone said, maybe we should stop hunting them. Yeah, probably a great idea, Sherlock. Let's stop hunting. There's only 20 of them left, right? Out of 100,000 plus, 200, 300,000 animals or whatever it was. So they basically stopped hunting the things. At that point in time, they started to track their population growth, expansion, and recolonization of habitats that they used to occupy, all the way from central California all the way down to Mexico. And what they started to do is they started to spread out from this little island, and as they reproduced, they occupied their old ancestral areas of land, right, and ocean. And when that population was modeled, lo and behold, it matched the J-shaped curve. And this model gave very accurate predictions of the population growth of this seal. Now, you wouldn't think they'd grow exponentially, but they did. Now, tell me why this population actually grew at this particular framework of growth. How was it able to do that? Think about the model, what it assumes. The model assumes what? Unlimited resources and the ability to harvest that resource and convert it into growth and reproduction. Okay? That's what these seals did. How are they able to do that?
There weren't a lot.
What's that?
There weren't a lot of them.
There weren't a lot of them. So that means in regards to their environment, because there were so few of them, the resources were basically unlimited to them. There was no competition for breeding space. There was plenty of food for them. Everything was available. Now notice where this plot stops in the 80s. Do you think the curve continues to look that way?
No.
It doesn't. So this curve has shifted and the model no longer fits the growth of this population. They have repopulated the coastline all the way from Isla Guadalupe and south of that, all the way north to Año Nuevo, which is up in San Francisco, where all the great white sharks are now feeding on, right? So they expanded, but now that curve and the model no longer fits well their population. Their population is growing much slower than this now. Why do you think that is the case?
Resources.
Because resources are now what? Finite for them, because they've occupied all the space. They're tapping into the fishery resources, and those resources are no longer unlimited. Therefore, does the model fit anymore? It does not. So natural populations only match the model predictions as long as the assumptions of the math are upheld in nature. And if they are not, then the model fails to basically accurately represent nature. Does that make sense? So this is what I want you guys to know about the models. Number one is you should know the basic equation of the models, and you should be able to define the terms for them. Remember, it's nothing but symbolic language, yeah? You should know what the model predicts. This model predicts this particular population growth curve, which is a J-shaped curve, right? You should know what the assumptions of the model are. This model assumes unlimited resource availability and your ability to convert that right into reproductive output. So, model, equation, definitions and terms, assumptions, predictions, and then the last thing is, does it work, right? How does it compare to nature? So here's an example where it worked, but it's now failing. Let's do another example. These are European rabbits. Rabbits breed like rabbits, which is quite quick. So these things were introduced to southern Australia in 1859 for England for sport hunting. And they were introduced to a little game preserve, and the English colonists would go hunting. Well, did they stay in that little reserve?
No.
No, because rabbits are great escape artists. They're great hoppers, they're great diggers, and so they got loose. And when they got loose, they found a gigantic land.